Happy New Year, listeners. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of 2020. This is Queens of the Mines, the authentic stories of GoldRush women who blossomed from the camouflaged, twisted roots of California. And it is recommended that you start this series from the first episode. It's a brand new year, and I start school in a few weeks. So, episodes will post every other Wednesday until our audience grows larger, or at least until I can adjust. You are invited to join me and an intimate audience for the next live recording session of the Queens of the Mines podcast at Legends in Sonora, January 26th and February 16th from 5 to 7 p.m. Your ticket includes coffee and dessert. Space is super limited. You can purchase tickets by sending $15 via Venmo to @QueensOfTheMines or via Cash App to $Queens of the Mines. Make sure you post ticket in the notes. I really hope to see you there. It should be a really special monthly event. And in 2020, you can also expect Queens of the Mines children's story time at Legends as well. The preceding program features stories containing sexual content, adult situations, including violence and violence against children. The preface may be extremely disturbing to some listeners, or anyone who may be secondhand listening. So, listener discretion is advised. Preface.
Between the graves and the city wall stood a low building in a clump of cedar trees.
Two Americans passed by a large cemetery while visiting in China during the early 1850s.
That is the baby tower, tended to by the Buddhist nunneries.
The building was a structure that was commonly built for the disposal of infants, used by parents too poor for burial cost or too ashamed of the murder of their own child. The infant would be done up in a package and thrown into one of the openings of the tower, or rather well, as it is sunk some distance below the earth. These babies, left in the towers, sometimes survived for up to 2 days, but soon died of hunger, cold, or exposure to heat.
The top, which raised about 10 feet above the ground, was roofed, and looking into it, we saw that the tower was filled.
In a mound of bamboo straw that moves with the crawling of the worms, tiny legs and arms and little fleshless bones protrude from the straw. Those passing by just ignore the screaming cries. Every few days, the person or group of people who built the tower would clear it out and bury the babies or burn the heap and spread the ashes over the land.
Was this a cemetery or a slaughterhouse?
The Chinese said it was only a tomb. There is no inquiry, no check. The parent had the power to kill or to save. If you were a woman born in the 19th century in China, it is sad to say that you would not have been considered as valuable in comparison to being born a male. You would have been perceived as subservient, your future role as a homemaker. As conditions worsened in China, it became more likely that your family was struggling to feed all of the members just to survive. In result, as a girl or a woman, you would have been extremely vulnerable to being given up, killed, or sold off by your family. In China, Confucianism considered a son necessary for the guarantee of provision of security. It was believed that the money spent on raising a female was not a logical investment, and so for the purpose of avoiding poverty and population control, female gendercide has been practiced since antiquity. So female babies were left in those towers, were often suffocated, or drowned, or starved. The pressure to not have more than one child was beyond devastating. Buddhists condemned the killings of the young girls and insisted it would bring bad karma. However, the Buddhist belief in reincarnation meant that the death of the infant was not final, as the child would be reborn. And this belief eased the guilty feelings consumed by the parents. If your family was not in danger of poverty, actions would be taken to make you a more desirable bride. At the time, the ultimate woman bared a 3-inch foot. This was known as a golden lotus. 4-inch feet, or silver lotus, was considered respectable, but feet that were 5 inches or longer, the iron lotus, was much less desirable. The girl with the iron lotus, well, her prospects for marriage would be low. Tiny feet were made possible by the process of foot binding, which began when a girl was at the age of 5 or 6. The pain was excruciating, yet millions of Chinese women were devoted to the tradition. Try to imagine what it might have been like to endure this process as a young child. First, your feet would be submerged into extremely hot water. Your toenails cut down as short as possible. Your feet would then be oiled and massaged before all of your toes, except the big toe, were snapped and forced flat against your sole, making a triangle. Bent double, the arch of your foot would be strained and folded in half. 10-foot-long silk strips that were 2 inches wide would have been used to bind your feet into place, and removed and replaced every few days so the pus and blood would not cause an infection. The extra hanging flesh would be left to rot or sometimes cut away. While you are enduring this breaking and binding, you're forced to walk long, long distances to hurry the breaking of the arches in your feet. As the silk wrappings would get tighter and tighter, your heels and soles would smash together. The process would last for 2 years, and when finished, there would be a cleft in your foot so deep you could hold a coin in it. Foot binding goes as far back as the 11th century in China, and clearly, social forces there had long suppressed women. Early in the 1830s, the first Chinese sailors and peddlers visited New York. And later in the decade, the first Chinese female was brought to the United States. Her name was a Feng Moi, brought to New York by 2 men who banked on exhibiting her as the Chinese lady. It would be another 10 years before the United States and China signed a treaty of peace, amity, and commerce. And another 3 years before 3 more Chinese students would arrive in the United States on the East Coast to go to school. Then, in 1848, Marie Seiss arrived in California, the first Chinese woman known to do so. Marie worked as a housekeeper for the couple that had brought her from Hong Kong, where she had worked for them for years as their maid. By 1849, Marie and 54 Chinese men were living in California. The captain of the ship, the Eagle, that brought Marie Seiss to California, deserted the vessel upon arrival in San Francisco and brought his entire crew of Chinese men along with him. He founded a town in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. They named it Chinese Camp. Soon, the news of gold for the taking, all the way across the ocean, had arrived in Hong Kong. Quickly, the story spread throughout the Chinese provinces. They were literally told California was one single mountain made of gold nuggets. Posters, maps, and pamphlets with over-exaggerated accounts of the golden hills of California were distributed at all the Chinese ports, where news traveled inland. The masters of the vessels quickly became wealthy with the passage money. China is closer to the shores of California in comparison to the eastern portion of the United States. And with that, it was not long before 20,000 Chinese men were sailing to California, what they called Gamshan, Mountain of Gold. But there would be one more Chinese woman who would arrive in San Francisco just before those tens of thousands, and I want you to know her name. Queens of the Mines features the authentic stories of gold rush women who blossomed from the camouflaged, twisted roots of California. These are true stories, with some of my own fabrication of descriptive details. In Chapter 3, we will hear the story of the true pioneer of San Francisco's Chinatown, whose story highlights important aspects of the role the Chinese immigrants played in America's largest migration, the Gold Rush. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Columbia Mercantile 1855, a reimagined Gold Rush era general store in Columbia State Historic Park, serving both local residents and state park visitors living history and offering high-quality grocery staples from local suppliers. It feels like an authentic mid-19th century mercantile. It's a great place to discover a treasure trove of gold standard products for your modern life. Columbia Mercantile 1855 is located at 11245 Jackson Street, in the most interesting building in Columbia State Historic Park. You may know it, the red brick building with its iconic green iron doors. They're open daily from 9 to 6 and will remain open during PG&E outages. This is Chapter 3, The Queen of Exploitation. Many long weeks at sea have come and gone, an endless rocking, and the voyage would soon be nearing her midway point. From Hong Kong, a clipper ship was slowly making her way to California. On the dock, a tall, young, slender Haku woman stands with broad shoulders, facing the sea. She is gazing out into restless black waves that glitter under a magnificent moon. It is late, and the rest of the Chinese passengers have bedded down for the evening, down in steerage, where the food was stored. She was the only Chinese woman on the ship. As she focused on the foamy sea, the wind brushed her rice-powdered skin. She was all alone now. The Hakka people chose to settle in the less accessible coastal areas in China, in inlets and bays surrounded by hills. At the time, there were 270 Hakka contemporary settlements in the District of Hong Kong, which was under British rule. Hard-working and united, much stronger, more independent, and more daring than the Chinese were the Hakka people. They were known to have a strong spirit of endurance, diligence, and bravery in exploring new lands. The woman's father, in the midst of an opium addiction, had sold her for a low price, and she prepared to board the clipper ship as an intended slave with her temporary owner, a man who had plans to sell her to the high man in California. When boarding the ship, the man had labeled her as his wife to not draw attention to the woman. He instructed her not to speak to anyone on board, and she did what she was told until he became sick and died on the ship just 5 days earlier. Now, that moonlit night on the ocean, her laughing eyes glazed as she contemplated what life would have been like to arrive in the foreign land, the property of a stranger. He was dead, and for the first time in the woman's life, she was free, and anything was possible. The woman, whose name was Ah Toy, would be the second Chinese woman to arrive in California, where there would be so many men with pockets full of gold. A smirk attempted to escape her thin pink lips. She was sailing to a new life, and she could become whatever she desired when she got there. In a frosty breath, she let out a whispered cry of relief. Zìyóu, freedom. Ah Toy felt the presence of someone step close behind her. She let out a dramatic sigh. Two strong hands settled on her hips and began to caress her lower back, and she felt a kiss on her neck and the nudge of a hat press against the back of her head. She swallowed the smirk and turned around to look into the adoring eyes of the captain of the ship. You know, listeners, you can always show support of the podcast by supporting our sponsors. This episode is also brought to you by Colored by Kayla. Kayla specializes in lived-in color, blondes, and beige. Online reviews boast Kayla always is on trend with her techniques and products and does beautiful work. She is also such a fun person to hang out with while sitting in her chair. And she cares about your hair, explains every step she's going to make, and most importantly, she's very talented. Kayla's located in Jamestown, and you can find her on social media by her Instagram handle and business name at Colored by Kayla. Kayla is available 24/7 for booking appointments by calling or texting 209-288-4512. Thank you, Kayla, for your support. Okay, back to the story. After her owner had died, it was not comfortable for her as the only woman in steerage. Luckily, it hadn't taken long for the captain of the ship to recognize the beauty in the only Chinese woman on board, who he met when her husband had died during passage. The captain was a sensitive man and took a liking to Ah Toy, this poor, exotic woman. Within days, he had taken her in, given her his bed to sleep in, food to eat, tea to drink. Ah Toy was either too afraid or maybe too smart to let him know she was merely a slave girl and not the wife of the dead Chinese merchant. She allowed him to believe she was deeply saddened by his passing, and she realized the more helpless she seemed, the more the captain doted on her. In the evenings, Ah Toy indulged her captain, giving over her delicate body to the tall American man. He had never seen a Chinese woman naked, and embarrassedly admitted that he had believed what was under the clothes of a Chinese woman was not entirely the same as a white woman. He told her any white man in California would be curious and would pay a good deal of money to let him have a look-see. In gratitude of her affections, the captain showered his new mistress with gold and gifts night after night, all of it amounting to a small fortune. The captain spent his downtime teaching her how to communicate in English, preparing the helpless, lonely woman for what he assumed would surely be misery upon her arrival in California. The clipper ship touched at the Sandwich Islands, later known as Hawaii. They backed the main yard off Diamond Head, sent the mail ashore, and picked up one missionary determined to save souls in California. as the ship left the islands, 3 beautiful Kanuka maidens swam alongside the ship, their skin glistening with each stroke, their swimming motion mimicking an aquatic dance, and Atoy wondered if these were the creatures they called mermaids. There would be less than 2 weeks to go. Are you enjoying the podcast? Please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. It is really so important. If you would like to contribute and get rewarded for it, check out our Patreon program on patreon.com/queensoftheminds or on our website, queensoftheminds.podbean.com. If you go to Instagram and find Sarah the Painter, that is SARAH the Painter, you'll find some amazing prints of Ava Brandon, Josefa Sahovia, Belle Cora, and Flo, the floating woman in white. I am honored and ecstatic, and I hope you will at least go check them out and show Sarah your love. These prints are available for purchase, and she does ship them, so go find her on Instagram and check them out and get a print of your favorite queen. Atoy lay nude across the bed in the captain's quarters. Slowly, she sat up and reached for her hot tea, careful not to move too quickly and wake the sleeping man. It had been nearly 5 weeks since her new freedom had been realized. Atoy, clearly a savvy woman, had many weeks to think about her upcoming venture. Tomorrow, she would disembark in California, stepping foot into San Francisco and into her new life. And rather than being held, Atoy was holding. Zìyóu. She wrapped her delicate fingers around the teacup and sipped it slowly, and whispered a newly learned phrase to the napping captain who laid at her unbound feet. You know nothing. Queens of the Minds was written, produced, and narrated by me, Andrea Anderson. Male narration was done by Slim Cessna, and the theme song, In San Francisco Bay, is done by DBUK. You can find the links to their music, tour dates, and merchandise, as well as the links to all of our social media and research links on our Podbean page at queensoftheminds.podbean.com. For a little extra fun, I'm requesting that you submit your GoldRush history story on the Podbean page to be read in an upcoming episode. Before we go, I want to talk about something very important. Did you know that 4 out of 5 of our Native women are affected by violence today? The U.S. Department of Justice found that American Indian women face murder rates that are more than 10 times the national average. Homicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among 10 to 24 years of age, and the 5th leading cause of death for American Indian and Alaska Native women between the ages of 25 and 34. Ongoing struggles with jurisdiction, the lack of emergency services, Amber's alerts and counseling. Also, family services relationships between governing entities, FBI and tribal communication, state and tribal communication, it all continues the pattern of structural violence. Learn more at www.csvanw.org/MMIW. The hashtag MMIW stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. The least we all can do is become aware. Until recently, historians and the public have dismissed conflict history and focused more on history that opposing beliefs could manage to agree on for some mutually beneficial end. Important elements that are absolutely necessary for understanding American history have sometimes been downplayed or virtually forgotten. If we do not incorporate racial and ethnic conflict in the presentation of the American experience, we will never understand how far we have come and how far we have to go. No matter how painful, we can only move forward by accepting the truth. I'm Andrea Anderson. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. Let's meet again next time on Queens of the Minds.
In San Francisco Bay, I swim most every day. I'm the deepest from the Golden Gate. I'm dodging. They are always surprised that I'm there, saying it's alright. Salt water burns our eyes. I cry, it's natural.
It's natural.
They whisper in my ears, their undying fear. With the last breath I hear my failings. I turn out their clothes, their stories untold, and mouths full of gold. I'm profiting.
I'm profiting.
To the kin, to the goon, to the kin, to the god, to the kin, to the goon, to the god. To the kin, to the goon, to the kin, to the god, to the kin, to the goon, to the god. To the kin, to the goon, to the kin, to the god, to the kin, to the goon, to the god. To the kin, to the goon, to the kin, to the god, to the kin, to the goon, to the god. And you know it's safe up above the pain to raise the bird upon the flame of time to fall and fall and fall again. Jumper hit my rolling nose. It's beating on forever, bro. And the sharks on patrol are gathering. I wrap my arms around the broke legs as lip bars get swept away. The deaf ears don't hear me say